Was someone guiltless under the law for making an oath that would cause them to sin? This is the question that we seek to answer today as we continue our verse-by-verse study of the book of Leviticus on walking through the Bible.
The glory of his cross.
If you have a Bible with you, turn to Leviticus chapter 5. We're going to be reading from verses 1 to 6. If you don't have a Bible, don't worry. Just follow along with us on the screen. The version that we'll be reading from is the New King James Version. So, Leviticus chapter 5, beginning at verse 1. If a person sins in hearing the utterance of an oath, and is witness, whether he has seen or known of the matter, if he does not tell it, he bears guilt. Or if a person touches any unclean thing, whether it is the carcass of an unclean beast, or the carcass of unclean livestock, or the carcass of unclean creeping things, and he is unaware of it, he also shall be unclean and guilty. Or if he touches human uncleanness, whatever uncleanness with which a man may be defiled, and he is unaware of it, when he realizes it, then he shall be guilty. Or if a person swears, speaking thoughtlessly with his lips, to do evil or to do good, whatever it is that a man may pronounce by an oath, and he is unaware of it, when he realizes it, then he shall be guilty in any of these matters. And it shall be, when he is guilty in any of these matters, that he shall confess that he has sinned in that thing, and he shall bring his trespass offering to the Lord for his sin which he has committed, a female from the flock, a lamb, or a kid of the goats, as a sin offering. So the priest shall make atonement for him concerning his sin. If you have headings in your Bibles, it probably says that this whole chapter deals with the trespass offering, the fifth category of offerings under the law of Moses. Certainly from reading the New King James Version down at verse 6, it is no wonder as to how we come away with this idea. But as we're going to see, the actual trespass offering was to cover unintentional sins where restitution was also required. Verse 6, verse 9, verse 11, and verse 12 make it clear that we are still talking about sin offerings, like in chapter 4. Why was the term trespass offering used then? Because sin is a trespass against God. Rather, the verse should read something like, and as a penalty for sin he has committed. That would make it clear that what we're still talking about are sin offerings. So going back to verse 1, the first 13 verses of the chapter take the general instructions of chapter 4 and add some instructions about 3 specific cases, as well as add some concessions as to the sacrifice for those who couldn't bring what God had required earlier. The first specific case involved witness testimony. What is being talked about here is if a person was called to testify before a court, was sworn in as a witness, and failed to tell all that they had seen or heard, they were guilty of sin, and needed to confess their sin and offer a sin sacrifice for the common person as seen at the end of chapter 4. Telling the whole truth and the whole truth is always something that God demands. If one is sworn to tell the whole truth and does not do it, they are lying and breaking that oath and would therefore be guilty of sin. This would likely result in the acquittal of someone of a charge simply because the friends of the accused testified, or the accused in any way influenced the testimony of the witness. Even though we're not under the law of Moses today, this should be a reminder to us that when something is needed to be known, such as in court, it is sinful to hold back. That is why Abraham sinned when he didn't say that Sarah was his wife as well as his sister, for in that case Abimelech needed to know the former fact. In verses 2 and 3 we have the second specific case, which has to do with the touching of something that is unclean. We haven't as of yet had revealed to us what animals are clean or unclean, and the rules in general. So we'll save that for later. But what we do need to know is that if they touched the carcass of an unclean animal, something that they were not supposed to do, and didn't immediately follow the process of what they were to do in those situations, they were unclean and guilty of sin. The same is true if they touched the uncleanness of a man or a woman and didn't follow the instructions under the law concerning that as well. Now, sometimes you might do so unknowingly, and so wouldn't have had the inclination to follow the purification process of the law that was required. Ignorance was not an excuse. Touching something unclean made you unclean, and so when one found out, one had to confess his sin and offer a sin sacrifice, following the instructions for the sin sacrifice of the common person. The third specific case is dealt with in verses 4 to 6, and it involved making rash oaths and then not fulfilling the oath. An example of this might be swearing to do something and then finding out that if you fulfilled this oath, you would be sinning. Instead of committing the actual sinful act, the person was to confess their sin and offer the sin sacrifice for the oath taken. This would prevent the greater physical consequences that might ensue from committing the actual sinful oath. Not fulfilling other types of oaths taken rashly, even if it did involve committing sin, were equally wrong. Again, the use of trespass offering in verse 6 is not a correct rendering of what the sacrifice is, for the same verse calls it a sin sacrifice. The actual trespass offering will be discussed starting at verse 14. Verse 6 also tells us that in all three cases, confession was required, which we most likely can assume was always required for sin sacrifices. And then the sacrifice of a female sheep or goat was required for the common person. We'll discuss the concessions the Lord made for those who could not offer these animals, the Lord willing, in the next episode. With that, our time is up for today. The Lord willing, we hope you'll join us for tomorrow's discussion of Leviticus chapter 5, verses 7 to 13, as we continue our walk through the Bible, one verse at a time. Thank you for watching today's episode. We hope that you found it edifying and ask that you not only subscribe to our channel and podcast, but that you like and share this episode among your friends so that the saving gospel of Jesus Christ can go out to the whole world.